And we're going to talk a little bit about your future. Who would not want to place a bet on exactly what job you'll be in 12 months? Yeah, because you don't know, do you? And you're here hoping it's going to be a great one. But we are living in a world of increasingly uncertain times. I think you've heard that more and more and more, but there are some very specific ways that that's true. We're going to try to share some ideas now that will be skills and attitudes that you can use throughout not only this year, but hopefully throughout life, so that you can have what life is really meant to be: fulfilling, enjoyable, special, and above all, contributory. Most of you are here in mind, body, and spirit. But my question is, where will you be in 10 years' time? Some of you will still be here in Nashville because, let's face it, this is a great place to live. Some of you will be someplace far away. Some of you may be in a completely different country. Who knows? So in 10 years' time, how old will you be? Well, most of you will be in your 30s. And you're thinking, oh boy, that's kind of impossibly old. Well, what about in 20 years' time? Oh my. 20 years' time, how old will you be?
40.
40. Now, I do work with young people, and so often I'll say, I have a question. How old is old? And without meaning to, they'll start saying, 30. 30's like old. I have a sister who's 30. She's just dull and boring. She's out of it. But 40, now you're starting to think, oh my, that's like old, old, old. Where will you be? You could be very mobile. Where will you be when you hit the half-century mark? Difficult for people in your generation to even imagine that. Where will you be? You may not even be in the world. Because if we can get Matt Damon back, we can probably get you back. So you may be living someplace that is incredibly far away. Because this is, of course, a university, we have to have at least one equation. And although the symbol of c stands for the speed of light in a vacuum, it also means what? Dig into your math. Well, c means constant. Delta means, yeah, there you go. That's okay. So what is this equation telling us? Yeah, the only constant is that nothing is constant. And that as time goes on, change is simply going to accelerate. You all are, again, what are called the I generation. You grew up digitally connected. And what they call the digital universe, which is the amount of stored information on servers, or what we now call the cloud, is actually increasing at 40% per year. That means the total amount of, first of all, what we used to call kilobytes, which you've never even heard of, and now we're talking about petabytes and all the rest of that, is doubling faster than every 2 years. So let's do just a couple of quick examples. How many of you have got a telephone that will take pictures? And you're looking at me like I'm an idiot. And you're saying, well, duh, Dan. Well, let me ask you this question. Think about that statement to somebody from a different generation. A telephone that takes pictures. What if I were a time traveler from the 60s? In fact, I am a time traveler from the 60s. And I were to show up here and go, oh, whoa, man. Whoa, this is awesome. Where am I? And you said, dude, you're at Vanderbilt. And I go, whoa, when is this? And you said, this is 2017. And I said, no way. And you say, yeah, how about you? And I said, I'm from like the 60s. Really? Let me take a picture of you with my phone. What would that sound like to a time traveler from the 60s? And I go, yeah, right. Next, you're going to call me on your camera. Because it's impossible for you to imagine a world where you couldn't take a picture with a phone. So how many of you on your phone have the ability to back up your phones somehow, to iCloud or something else, right? Okay. Who's got, they think, maybe as many as 1,000 images on your phone? And now you're laughing, saying, Dan, I got 1,000 images of my lunch from yesterday. What are you talking about? So let's say that in this room of 15 people, each of you only backed up 1,000 images. That would be how many? 15,000 images that are up there in the cloud. If we take the greater Vanderbilt community, which with all the employees, faculty, and staff, there's probably 40,000 people in this community, and if each one just uploaded 1,000 of those photos to the cloud, then we would have 400,000 images. If we take the 1.5 million people in greater Nashville and each one uploaded 1,000, we would have 1.5 billion images. And if we took the 3+ billion people in the world that have a phone that can take pictures and they all backed up 1,000 images, we got 3 trillion of those in the cloud, which would mean if the atmospheric conditions were ever exactly right, it'd be raining selfies. Just be pouring out of that cloud. And this is only images. And you know you have many more than that backed up, don't you? Who here knows somebody that spends quite a bit of time on YouTube? Nobody in this room, but you all have friends, right? It's been estimated that the amount of new content uploaded weekly in YouTube would require 100 years to view. That's a lot of content, and it is only accelerating. And so who can keep up with all this information? The answer is no single individual can. And it's going to continue to grow and grow and grow. The world is changing in terms of its dimensions. Right now there's a very, very hot spot in the Korean Peninsula. There's a lot of words that are flashing back and forth. Sometimes those words become war. We hope it doesn't happen in this case. But interestingly enough, since the year 1990, 32 new nations were established on the earth. 32 new nations. And it is continuing to happen even at an accelerating rate. What happened last year with our allies across the pond? A very unexpected outcome. And that Britain decided we're going to leave the European Union. This is something that was never predicted in any of the opinion polls, and yet it is rocking and rolling what is actually the world's largest economy, which is the European Union. And so it's amazing what an impact that is happening, and it will continue to. In business, this can certainly happen. Who here has ever heard of a company called Netscape? Okay, do you know what they're famous for?
I know it's something to do with the internet, but I don't know.
Okay, great. Well, you know more than most people. Netscape was a company that created the very first internet browser. Before Netscape came out with what they called Netscape Navigator, you could get into the internet if you were an academic, a scholar, a government official, a military person, but it was mostly lines of text. And Mark Andreessen and his buddies developed Netscape Navigator so that you could actually have what's called a graphical user interface to get all this information. So what that meant is sometime around 1994 or 1995, for the first time, you could open your computer and see what the weather is outside. Before that, you had to open the window to see what the weather is outside. But because of this, a whole world opened up to people. And Netscape had more than 90% market share. And when you begin to study markets and market share, you will grow to understand that 90% just about never happens. And when it does, it is dominant and powerful. But here we are about 20 years later, and only one person has even heard of Netscape and no real idea of what they've done. So how many of you instead use Safari when you browse the net? Who uses Google Chrome? Anybody use Firefox? Nobody uses Internet Explorer. But at one time, Netscape had the dominant share. It doesn't anymore. Things can change really quickly. The #1 company in its industry worldwide about 18 months ago was this company. It was respected, it was applauded, it was appreciated, and now it is derided because of the fraud that they committed with emissions. So things can happen very, very quickly in business where nothing really can be depended upon there. And then entire industries can change. Does anybody know what that device is? I know some people in the back of the room that probably do.
Is that a credit card thing?
No, but that's an interesting guess. Credit card thing, okay? This is what's called a slide rule. A slide rule is a calculating device. And that plastic bit here, it has a thin line on it. The thin line is called a cursor. Now you're saying, no it isn't, Dan. A cursor is a blinking thing on my computer screen. No, it's a cursor. And by moving these scales in a certain way and lining up the cursor, you can do 34 different kinds of mathematical calculations with this. You can do all of the trig functions, you can do natural logs, you can do logarithms, you can do square roots, you can do cube roots. It's incredibly rapid, amazingly precise. You can go to multiple significant digits in calculation. And you notice that it comes with a holster. And what you're looking at is my high school graduation present from my parents when I got out of high school. I did wear it on my belt. So when I walked on the campus at Harvard, and I said, yo. And we'd have slide rule races. And one day I turned to my friend Mark in physics class and I said, hey Mark, what's that thing in your hand? He said, it's called a Texas Instruments calculator. And I said, it's a fad, it'll never last. And you're all laughing and saying, oh, that's kind of funny. But the fact of the matter is, the slide rule industry was the way that people calculated. It was the only way people understood to calculate. And it was wiped out in a quick flood of technology. This really has an impact on you for career planning. How many of you know people that work in what is called IT, tech? Well, interestingly enough, what that generally means are internet-based businesses or e-commerce businesses, which have only existed in any practical sense for less than 25 years. About 50% of the jobs that will exist in 20 years are estimated to be in industries that have not yet been invented. So how do you prepare for something that hasn't even been invented yet? It has a big impact on career planning. So the question you may be asking yourself is, what in the world can I do about all this? Am I going to be a leaf caught in the stream, or is there anything we can do? Well, I've got a couple of ideas for you. First of all,